So in this video, we will understand the various background processes in the Oracle databases. There are certain processes which are mandatory, like DBWR, LogWriter, PMON, SMON. And there are other processes like MMON, MMNL, MMN, Archiver. From this, you see if any of these five background processes like SMON, PMON, LogWriter or database writer, anyone goes down, the full database gets shut down automatically. These are very important mandatory processes. Now, let's understand what DBWR process does. DBWR takes the data from the buffer cache and puts it to the data file. And when does it do that? It does it when checkpoint occurs. And when does a checkpoint occur? A checkpoint occurs whenever there is a redo log file switch, or whenever you give commands like alter system checkpoint, then a checkpoint occurs. When your redo buffer is say 1/3 filled, a checkpoint occurs. So, and it can also be set using parameters like log checkpoint timeout interval, etc. So now you understood that there are different reasons why a checkpoint will occur, and checkpoints, whenever a checkpoint occurs, data from the buffer cache goes into the data file, and this is done by the DBWR. And also the log writer, whenever checkpoint occurs, the log writer takes the data from the redo buffer and puts it to the redo log file. So now you understood that this is the role of DBWR and the role of log writer. The role of log writer is to take the data from the redo buffer and puts it to the redo log file. Next important process is PMON. What does the PMON do? Say a user is connecting to the database and suddenly that particular user becomes disconnected. PMON would clear the resources in the memory of that particular users. PMON is also used for dynamic registration. Say your instance has to be registered to a listener, so PMON is responsible for that. SMON is called the system monitor, and what it does is, suppose there's a crash and when you restart the database to do instance recovery, PMON is responsible for that. SMON is responsible for that. SMON is responsible to see that all the database processes are running smoothly, the contents of the buffer cache are moved to the data file. When you restart the database, is responsible for instance recovery. So let's understand about MMON process. MMON process is responsible to collect the statistics about the database and store it into the automatic workload repository, while MMNL is responsible for collecting session related information and storing it in active session history table, while MMN is responsible for managing the memory. You know, in 10G we have SGA underscore target. So when you set this parameter, the buffer cache, the shared pool and redo buffer is automatically managed by the Oracle database, and for this MMN is the process to do that. Archiver is responsible for generating archive logs from the redo log. So whenever there is a redo log switch at the archiver destination, the archiver files are created. These archiver files would be required when you are doing a recovery. Additionally, archiver also is useful for transferring the redos to the standby server in a data guard environment. Next important process is recovery. This is used in distributed databases. RVWR is responsible for generating flashback logs. So now you understood all the important background processes in the Oracle database.